Hello and welcome to Unacademy. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. Let's begin the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 8 important articles for a detailed and comprehensive analysis so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. On the 23rd of November, Unacademy will be conducting the Civil Services Championship Test. So, this is a great opportunity for IAS aspirants to attempt full length question papers and stand a chance to win attractive rewards in the process. So, you will not only get a chance to attempt a full length test paper and check your preparedness, but you also stand to win attractive rewards, including a car, MacBook, iPhone 17, and scholarships to our IAS courses. So those interested, please click on the link provided in the video description. With this, let's get started. And if you want the PDF of the session, please join our official Telegram channel. After the session ends, we will be sharing the PDF over here. So let's look at the first article. On page number 6 and 8, the Hindu carries two important articles. There is one editorial and one detailed column on the digital personal data protection rules that were recently notified by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. The Government of India, just last week on 14 November, it has notified the rules under the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. So, this has some implications with regard to the basic rights that citizens enjoy with regard to your data privacy, data security. And this has serious implications with regard to how the RTI Act will be enforced. So there are some interesting points to discuss and debate under this topic. So let's start from the basics. You need to know in what context was the DPDP Act passed by the Parliament in 2023. See, the story of this goes back to 2017, a historic ruling of the Supreme Court in the KS Puttaswamy judgment. In this landmark case, the Supreme Court upheld right to privacy as a fundamental right. Right to privacy was recognized as a fundamental right under the provisions of Article 21. And this pushed the government as well to take the matter of privacy more seriously. Though India was by then the largest internet economy, it had millions of internet users using various forms of digital media, and the various intermediaries, be it the private social media companies or even government entities and organizations, they were all harvesting user data, processing it, transferring it. And some of the Indian data was being stored offsite in foreign jurisdictions. And despite this, there was no specific data protection law in the country to ensure your data privacy and data security. So once the Supreme Court recognized right to privacy as a fundamental right in the case Puttaswamy case, the government of India established a committee. The BN Sri Krishna committee was established. So under Justice BN Sri Krishna, this committee was constituted to provide recommendations for a draft law to provide for data protection. Because by then, most of the other developed countries and jurisdictions, they had brought in such laws and regulations to protect data privacy and data security. For example, if you look at European Union, the EU had brought out the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regime. Then countries like Singapore, Australia, they all had their own data protection laws by then. So India was way behind the curve. So in 2018, following the Supreme Court's judgment on right to privacy, the BN Sri Krishna committee was set up to come out with recommendations for such a law. So this committee provided a set of recommendations, and based on this, a draft bill was prepared. This draft bill was tabled in the parliament by 2019, but this first iteration of the bill became very controversial because apparently the government had deviated by the recommendations that were provided by the BN Sri Krishna committee. There was a lot of opposition in the parliament regarding some of the controversial provisions of the bill, and eventually the bill was removed and a fresh bill was tabled in the parliament. So, this particular bill has gone through at least three different iterations in the parliament before it was passed into a law, before it was enacted by the parliament in 2023. Now, what are the key provisions of this law and why the new rules are being notified now? What are the key provisions of these new rules? And let's critically examine those rules as well. Now, if you look at the recommendations of B. N. Sri Krishna committee, the committee had recommended that the users who are contributing their data, whose data is being harvested by the social media companies, by the government entities, they should be considered as data principals, meaning they are the owners of their data. The ones who are generating the data, the user, they are the data principals according to the law, meaning you have a certain ownership over your data. You can exercise a set of rights with regard to how your data will be collected, whether your consent has been obtained in order to collect your data, how your data will be processed and handled by these intermediaries. So these rights were recommended by the B. N. Sri Krishna committee and they have been incorporated into the law as well. Whereas the intermediaries, the ones who are collecting, handling, processing, transferring your data, it could be public intermediaries or private. They are recognized under the law as data fiduciaries. Data fiduciaries are those private companies, the tech companies, social media firms, or could be government organizations as well, or banks. These public and private intermediaries are recognized as data fiduciaries as they are basically handling, collecting, processing, and storing your data of the data principals. So, to secure these rights to data principals, to protect their data privacy and data security, certain obligations have been placed on the data fiduciaries. The rights can be guaranteed only when a certain obligation is placed on those who might violate those rights. So, this law provides for a certain set of duties and obligations on data fiduciaries. So, as a result of this law, the users who are the data principals, they get rights such as the right to informed consent, meaning before your data is collected by a fiduciary, they need to obtain your explicit and informed consent. Now, let's say a company like Facebook, or let's say other social media apps like X or Instagram or WhatsApp. When you're downloading the app and opening an account on this application, a lot of permissions are obtained. Basically ask access to your device and they ask certain access for your data as well. Now, this has to be very explicitly mentioned, and the user should have full control over the data that they are willing to share. The terms and conditions must be very clear. So, only with the informed consent of the data principal can the data be harvested by the data fiduciary. And even with regard to how the data would be handled once it is collected, how it will be processed, whether it will move beyond Indian jurisdiction, and will the data be transferred back, and what would be the protections that are accorded. Will the data be encrypted to ensure the privacy and security of the data principal? All these details will have to be clearly specified by the data fiduciary even before they collect the data. And they have to obtain their explicit consent. This is what you mean by informed consent. So, with your approval, with your knowledge, these fiduciaries can collect your data and use it because that is the very nature of a digital world. Eventually, data collection, data processing, handling is essential, right? It performs a core economic function. In fact, government delivers public services based on this. But while ensuring that data is being collected, if consent is obtained, informed consent, this guarantees the data privacy and data security of the data principals. The data principals are also given the right to edit or modify their data, to make corrections to the data which has been collected. There might be some mistakes when the data was collected, or there might be new updates that the data principal would like to add. So the right to edit and modify is also provided under the law. The law also provides for the right to erase your data, which is nothing but the right to be forgotten. Now, are you aware that most of the tech companies, the online social media platforms, they tend to retain your data even after you delete your account and unsubscribe to their services? They will still use the data to train their algorithms. So, to ensure that your data, whatever was collected, is completely erased and you're completely forgotten by the algorithm, the user should have this right. The data principal is given this right, which has to be fulfilled by the fiduciaries. So when you're deleting your social media accounts or when you're unsubscribing to a certain digital service, there should be a clear provision provided where you can opt for data erasure, where you can exercise your right to be completely forgotten. So these set of rights are accorded to the data principles in order to protect data privacy and data security of the users. Now, to enforce these rights and to deal with any disputes that might arise, a data protection board was proposed by the Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee. But Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee's recommendations provided for an independent board. A data protection authority was actually recommended by the committee, which would be an independent authority, which would be independent of the government. But this is where the government has made a big deviation from the recommendations of Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee. So today, the government has not set up the data protection agency as an independent authority. Rather, it has been set up as just a board within the Ministry of Electronics and IT. Under the Ministry of Electronics and IT itself, the Data Protection Board of India is being constituted, and the new rules provide for the establishment of this board. So this is a big deviation because please understand the Data Protection Board of India will comprise of 4 members according to the new rules who are appointed by the government. It functions as a subsidiary office of the Ministry of Electronics and IT itself. Now, this is a case of vested interest. Because, see, the government itself is involved in granting permission for the private tech companies to set up businesses in India, right? Plus, there would be government entities, be it the finance ministry, the IT department, or let's say the security agencies, or be it the UIDAI. They all collect and process your data. So, if these cases come up of violation of data privacy and data security, a government entity itself would be the deciding authority. So, this compromises the independence of the board itself. The B.N. Sri Krishna Committee had recommended for an independent authority. The recommendation was to set up a Data Protection Authority of India, which would be independent of the government. But now the government has deviated from the recommendation in the current act. A data protection board has been provided, and according to the new rules that have been notified, it has been set up under the Ministry of Electronics and IT as a subsidiary office. The 4 members of this board would be appointed by the government, meaning the government will have full control over the board. So, this is one criticism which has come up against the new rules that were notified. And also, please note, in the law that has been enacted, the government has granted several exemptions to itself. With regard to the obligations on data fiduciaries, the government has granted several exemptions to government entities on the grounds of national security. Law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies, they have been given wide sweeping powers and they're exempted from most of these provisions. Be it the CBI, the NIA, Intelligence Bureau, RAW, Enforcement Directorate, the IT department, several such government entities are exempted. See, some exemptions are necessary in order to deliver public services. For example, the Unique Identification Authority of India or the IT department, they will have to collect your data, process your data, and sometimes they may not be able to provide these rights guaranteed under the law for the sake of governance, for the sake of administration, for the sake of continuing public services. So some exemptions are totally understandable. Of course, Some exemptions will have to be provided to deliver public services. Similarly, some exemptions will have to be provided on the grounds of national security, because intelligence agencies, police, law enforcement, they need to access your data time to time. But this has to be targeted surveillance, which can be mounted, but it can't enable the violation of rights, or it can't be misused by the party in power to target dissent and opposition. So instead of maintaining some checks and balances here, the government has granted wide sweeping exemptions to several government entities and agencies, law enforcement and intelligence organizations on the grounds of security. And this is where the biggest criticism comes up against the law, that the government has completely deviated from the recommendations of Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee. Now, if you look at the new rules that were notified in November 2025, the Digital Personal Data Protection Rules, these rules will basically give effect to the law. I hope you know that the law enacted by the parliament is just a skeletal framework which carries the legislative intent. But the actual implementation depends on the rules which are basically drafted and notified by the concerned ministries. This is what we refer to as subordinate legislation, where the parliament delegates the legislative powers to the concerned ministry to draft the specific rules, to add that muscle to the law, which basically brings the law into effect. And the government notifies these rules. So, in the new rules that have been notified, there are provisions which will basically bring this law into effect starting from 2027. A 18-month window is being provided for the data fiduciaries to achieve compliance. Now, this again is understandable. Obviously, to make such a big shift, the tech companies and the government entities as well, they would need some time to implement these changes on their platforms. Even for banks and financial institutions to make these changes, there would be some time duration needed. And accordingly, the rules provide for a 18-month window for the data fiduciaries, meaning this law will take full effect only from 2027 onwards. But some provisions have already come into effect from 14th November. That is, once the rules were notified, some of the provisions have already taken effect, and I'll explain which are those provisions. But when it comes to rights of data principles, like right to informed consent, right to edit, modify your data, right to erase, or the right to be forgotten, with regard to these data privacy provisions, they will take effect only from 2027, which means the fiduciaries have enough time to make the changes happen. And also, the rules provide for a consent manager through which you can manage all your consent for multiple data fiduciaries. For example, on your phone, you have something called a permission manager, right? Or through one platform, through one tool, you are managing your device permissions to various devices. Whether this app can access your microphone, whether this app can access your contacts, or this app can access your camera, right? You can manage permissions for various apps on the phone through one permission manager. So this is a specific tool which is built into your mobile device. A similar feature will be built in the coming months, a consent manager, where you can manage your consent for different fiduciaries. You can decide what consent you will provide to WhatsApp. You can decide what consent you'll provide to Instagram. You can decide what consent you'll provide to your banking application or to any government application on your phone. So a common consent manager would be developed, and it will become a standard feature in your devices in the coming months. So this is another important feature, a very positive feature, which can actually make it easy for data principals, for the users to manage their data, to manage their consent. The rules also mandate the appointment of a data protection officer by the data fiduciaries. The data protection officer will ensure compliance with the law. All the fiduciaries, they should have a position, a dedicated position for a data protection officer who will ensure compliance of the organization with the new law and the new set of rules. So these are some good aspects of the law. There are some positive aspects in this law. But the biggest concern is with regard to the dilution of the RTI, which is being achieved through the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. Since this law was proposed in 2022, that's when the final draft was brought out by the government for public consultation. Even when it was being passed through the parliament in 2023, there was a lot of opposition, criticism against this particular provision. Even now, the new rules which are notified in 2025, which is bringing the law into effect, the same criticism has come up that this law is being indirectly used by the government to basically dilute the RTI. By using another law, a critical legislation is being killed by the government. That's a criticism which has come up. So, what is this dilution of RTI? How is it possible? And by the way, please note, this provision of the law takes immediate effect. It has already come into effect the moment it was notified by the government last week. See, under the RTI Act of 2005, Section 8, Clause 1, Clause J, deals with what information can be shared with public, what cannot be shared with the public. As you all know, RTI has been a very critical legislative tool for promoting transparency, accountability in governance. Right? It has basically empowered the citizens. It has empowered activists and the civil society to hold the government accountable for its actions and policies and decisions. But under this provision, the public information officer can withhold information if it is related to personal information of the officials who are involved in making decisions. On the grounds of personal information, in order to protect the privacy, the data privacy of the officers involved, this section had provided for a protection for these officers, where the public information officer can deny the sharing of such information in the public domain if the disclosure could compromise personal information of the officials and if it was not serving any larger public interest. But however, it had an exception. If the petitioner, if the activist who's filing this RTI application, if they can establish that this information is needed in larger public interest, if the disclosure of this information is justified in larger public interest, then the public information officer could have made such information public, even if it contained some personal information of the officials involved. Let's say the personal data, the personal profile of government officers or the government ministers, if it were to be revealed through this information, but if it serves a larger public interest, the public information officer could order the release of such information once it is established that it fulfills a larger public interest. This exception was provided. So this was a very balanced provision which would take care of the privacy of the officials and the ministers who are involved in decision making and policy making. At the same time, if larger public interest was involved, in the interest of transparency, accountability, such information could have been shared. But now, through the Digital Personal Data Protection Act and the new rules that have been notified, the government is killing this exception. It removes this exception. So even if larger public interest is established, public information officers can deny sharing information in the public domain if it contains any personal information. Now, this is very vague. It's a very vague definition which has been provided in the law. So it's giving a lot of discretion to the authorities. It is giving a lot of discretion to the public information officers. They can withhold information, even essential information can be withheld by just stating that it is concerning personal information or it contains or it is related to personal information of the officers. And it can withhold that information in the name of data privacy, data security. So basically, in the name of data privacy, data security, the government allegedly is trying to kill right to information. So this provision has taken immediate effect. While the other provisions of the law will come into effect in 2027, this particular provision has taken immediate effect. Even the Data Protection Board of India will be constituted with immediate effect under the Ministry of Electronics and IT. So this is what you need to learn about the key provisions of these new rules that are notified under the data protection law. So based on this, let's take up a practice question. Now, if you've seen previous mains papers, you would be aware that this particular topic has already given us 2 questions in mains exam under internal security, because this is related to digital security and cyber security as well. So there has been a question on the recommendations of Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee. And recently, there has been a question on the Data Protection Act that was passed by the Parliament. So be prepared for the topic. Some topics might repeat. So this time, you might expect a question on the rules that are notified under this law. Discuss the recently notified digital personal data protection rules and critically evaluate its key provisions. So, as always, let's discuss the approach to answer writing. Let me provide you the structure so you can build your own answers. So, in the introduction, you can talk about the importance of data privacy. Why data privacy is important in today's world, especially for a country like India. So, can be one of the introduction, or you can take a completely different approach. You can just set the context by pointing out that new rules under the data protection law have been notified. It provides for the enforcement of this law, right? And you can say that it upholds data privacy, data protection, and it is in line with the Supreme Court's recommendation with regard to right to privacy. So that could also be one of the introduction that you can bring out in this answer. Then in the body, you will discuss the key provisions. Maybe before discussing the key provisions, you can provide some background to this law. You can include a brief background. You can mention K.S. Puttaswamy judgment, right to privacy being held as a fundamental right, the establishment of Justice B.N. Sri Krishna Committee, and how the law was enacted. Just a brief background can be provided, and then discuss some of the key provisions. Discuss the difference between data principals and data fiduciaries. Who are data principals? Who are data fiduciaries? What rights have been provided to data principals? What obligations have been placed on data fiduciaries? Talk about the Data Protection Board of India. So once you discuss all these provisions, then talk about the concerns being raised. The concern is mainly with regard to the exemptions, the wide sweeping exemptions given to several government agencies on the grounds of security. This could potentially be misused. It could be misused by the party in power to target dissent and opposition, to stifle criticism, to even enable mass surveillance. So there is a serious concern present here. There are no checks and balances in this regard. And the dilution of RTI. The dilution of RTI through this law. How public information can be withheld by public information officers on the grounds that it contains personal information of officials. So this dilution of RTI could basically kill right to information. These concerns you need to flag and then conclude by providing a way forward. You can suggest that there should be checks and balances while exercising these extraordinary powers that the government is according to itself. There should be more transparency regarding how these exemptions will apply. And the government should come clean on the intent of the law when it comes to dilution of RTI. So suggest a way forward here, suggest that there should be some sort of checks and balances, and that will basically complete your answer. So using this approach, try to build your own answers and please practice your answer writing. This is absolutely important for your mains exam. Now let's look at the next article, a very interesting article related to the POCSO Act, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, one of the most important legislations in the country to protect minor children from sexual abuse and sexual offences. Recently, a case has come up in front of the Supreme Court where a woman stands accused of raping a minor boy. So this particular case is presenting a legal challenge because the accused has petitioned the Supreme Court. The woman has approached the Supreme Court, pointing out that POCSO does not recognize a female offender. On the basis of gender, the woman is arguing that the law does not recognize the offender to be from the other gender, a female. And on these grounds, The petitioner is arguing that POCSO provisions cannot be invoked in this particular offense. Now, this is a very serious case, a case where a minor boy has allegedly been raped by this woman. And according to the accusation, the woman was involved in a penile vaginal intercourse with this minor boy, which amounts for rape under the definition of POCSO. So now the argument of the accused is that POCSO provisions cannot be invoked because, according to the petitioner, POCSO does not contain a explicit provision on women committing rape against a minor boy. So what does the law say? What is the intent of this law with regard to gender-based crimes? Is there gender neutrality in this law? Right? How does the law treat the victims and how does this law treat the accused? So let's take a look at this. Now, if you look at POCSO provisions, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, how it treats the victims and how it treats the offenders on the basis of their gender is very, very important. But please understand, the government has clarified multiple times, the judiciary has clarified multiple times that this law is gender neutral when it comes to the victims. So, be it a minor girl or a minor boy, both are protected under this particular law. Both genders are protected from sexual abuse and sexual offenses if they are minors under this law. So, the Ministry of Women and Child Development has informed the Parliament several times regarding this question that the law is gender neutral. So, be it a minor boy or a minor girl who has suffered such sexual abuse or who has been exploited through sexual offenses, right? They are protected under this law. Now, coming to the offenders, what does the law say? What is the argument of the petitioner? And what other references can we draw? The writer is very, very clear that the legislative intent of this law, when it was passed with the Parliament, was to keep it gender neutral, even with regard to the offenders. That's the argument of the writer of this column. Meaning, the law is not only gender neutral for victims, the law is gender neutral for offenders as well. So, it means that the offender can not just be a male who might sexually abuse a minor girl or even a minor boy, but it could also include a female offender sexually abusing a minor boy or a minor girl. So the writer supports her argument very strongly based on established precedents and by drawing the required references and parallels. And that is what we need to learn. See, the petitioner is arguing that this law does not account for a female offender on the grounds that Section 3 of the law uses the pronoun he while referring to the offender. While referring to the perpetrator of sexual violence against minor children, the law uses the pronoun he. So it appears that it's referring only to a male offender. That's the argument of the petitioner, that the pronoun used is only he or she has not been used, meaning female offender is not accounted for under the law. So you can't invoke POCSO provisions. That's the argument the women petitioner is making. But however, the writer points out the General Clauses Act 1897. Under the GC Act 1897, the pronoun he will automatically include she as well. And also, the law does not explicitly exclude women offenders. So, when such explicit exclusion is not provided, it is automatically assumed that he could also mean she in this context. Now, look at Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, Section 63, that deals with rape. This is a gender-specific law. Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which is based on the Indian Penal Code, Section 375 of the IPC. In this case, rape is defined as a male offender committing a rape against a female victim. That's how Indian law treats rape when it comes to adults. Is that clear? There's a clear gender exclusion here. The law is very, very explicit in this regard. Women raping a man is not accounted for under Indian law if they're adults. But if A male offender is accused of rape against a female victim. That is what is covered under the law, be it under the previous IPC or Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which has replaced it. So this law is very explicit in this regard, and it covers a wide set of sexual offenses as well, right? Because rape is not just limited to penile vaginal intercourse. Different types of sexual abuse, exploitation, rape is covered under the law, and so does POCSO as well. And in the case of minor children, as I told you, POCSO was designed with a specific intent. A legislative intent was there when the law was passed by the parliament. The legislative intent is to protect all minor children, irrespective of their gender, and to deal with all sexual offenders of minor children, irrespective of the gender of the accused. So this is very, very clear from the reading of the concerned provisions that POCSO is indeed gender neutral for both victims and as well as for the offenders. So a woman offender cannot claim that POCSO does not explicitly define this. Here, he is assumed to include she as well under the provisions of POCSO. The Supreme Court also has made this clear in the Sakshi versus Union of India case 2004 that POCSO Act is indeed gender neutral. This is what we understand from this important article. So please take up this practice question for your mains exam. The POCSO Act's objective is to safeguard children from sexual abuse, irrespective of the sex or gender identity of the person inflicting it. Examine. So it's a very specific topic, a clear-cut discussion that you can have, and a very important topic for social issues and even for Indian polity. Now, moving on page number 8, there's another important article related to precision medicine. This article will help us understand what is precision medicine. So let's break down this topic. It is very important for prelims and important for mains as well under science and technology. Precision medicine is more accurately referred to as precision biotherapeutics. So as the name itself indicates, it is targeted medicine. It is targeted medical intervention to treat certain diseases or to prevent certain diseases. See, now if you look at genetic diseases, diseases that occur at a molecular or cellular level, most of the treatment is symptomatic. Correct? Now, let's say someone suffering from a genetic disorder or someone suffering from a cellular anomaly, which leads to cancer, let's say, for example. The treatment is largely symptomatic. The existing line of treatment for such conditions, for example, non communicable diseases, you take diabetes, for example, or you take cardiovascular diseases or cancer and other genetic disorders as well. The most of the treatment for such diseases is largely symptomatic. Only the symptoms are treated, not the root cause. The root cause, which is causing that disease, is not treated in most cases. You take genetic disorders, the genetic anomaly is not treated. Or you take any anomalies at the molecular cellular level, they are not directly treated. But in the existing line of treatment, it is largely symptomatic treatment. Now, this is where a big revolution is coming in the field of biotechnology, in the field of medicine, with the evolution of big data, data analytics, and artificial intelligence, with the evolution of genetic science, with the evolution of molecular biology. A new domain of medicine is coming up called precision medicine, precision biotherapeutics. This is a merger of three distinct domains. It brings genetic sciences together with molecular biology and data analytics. So, with a role for artificial intelligence. The merger of these domains is bringing out new breakthroughs. New revolutionary treatments are coming up, which can help treat and even prevent some of the non communicable diseases. So, for example, using gene editing technology such as CRISPR to edit specific genes to prevent a disease or cure a disease. This is very much possible through CRISPR-Cas9 technology. You can carry out specific editing of the gene where the anomaly is present, and you can essentially suppress or bring out certain features, right, which can help in preventing a disease or curing the disease entirely. Or mRNA, using mRNA to produce or maybe suppress certain types of proteins. Because in most cases of cancer, it is the anomalous production of proteins and the anomaly at the cell and molecular level is what leads to cancer. Now, this can be altogether suppressed through mRNA, where the production of such proteins and cells can be completely suppressed. Or you can boost immunity by synthesizing certain proteins through mRNA based treatment. And today you have synthetic uh, material which can be produced in the lab, right? In synthetic genetics, in synthetic mRNA based treatment, which can be used to cure certain diseases or prevent certain diseases entirely. So, this is a revolutionary breakthrough when it comes to treating cancer, treating disorders like, let's say, diabetes, which is non communicable disease, cardiovascular diseases, etc. So, right now, this industry is emerging as a multi billion dollar industry. It is already expected to be a $22 billion industry. But the point is, it is unaffordable. Such treatment is super expensive. It's not easily accessible for everyone. It is right now the privilege of the elite, the rich, the influential. Now, for India to make use of precision medicine, we need certain policy interventions to make it accessible, to make it cheaper and affordable for the common man. Because see, India has one of the highest burden of non-communicable diseases and related morbidity. Be it cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, India registers nearly 65% of the deaths because of these reasons. Trust me, most of them can be prevented in the coming future, in the coming years and decades through precision medicine. And the Department of Biotechnology has already come out with a policy in this regard. It has given top priority to the field of precision medicine. Under the National Health Policy, there are few priority pillar areas which are identified. One of the priority pillar is priority medicine or precision medicine, which has been identified by the Department of Biotechnology. So India's Department of Biotechnology is working with the biopharma industry, the medical healthcare industry, and even the tech industry. They're collaborating together to bring out new breakthroughs. In fact, the government of India has come out with a specific policy for this. The biotech for economy, for environment, for employment policy. There is a dedicated policy in this regard to encourage the biotech industry in the country. The biotech for economy, environment, employment policy of Department of Biotechnology. There is dedicated funding for the biotech industry through this initiative. See, India has the infrastructure needed to pioneer precision medicine. We have the skilled manpower in the pharma industry, in the biotech industry. The private participation is already there. There are several public research institutions at the national level that are working in the field of genetic sciences, CRISPR-Cas9, and as well as in the field of molecular biology and cellular biology. So if they can collaborate with the private industry, India can also see big breakthroughs in the field of precision medicine, which can help in making such treatments accessible and affordable for the common people. That is the lesson we take away from this article. Coming to the next topic on page 10, Chief Justice of India, B.R. Gavai, has made a very important reference to objective resolution and its connection to Article 32 and Directive Principles of State Policy. The Chief Justice of India was invited to deliver a speech marking the 75th anniversary of India's living constitution. So, while delivering this important speech, the Chief Justice of India has referred to the objective resolution. So, what is the objective resolution? The objective resolution was tabled in the Constituent Assembly in 1946 by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. So this document acts as a guiding document for the framers of the Indian Constitution. It became a guide for the preamble itself. It identified the spirit which should be imbibed into the Indian Constitution, which was being drafted by the Constituent Assembly. It basically brought out principles such as India being a sovereign, independent, secular republic. It cherished the ideals of justice, equality, liberty, fraternity, freedom. These ideals were brought out through the Objective Resolution of 1946 that was introduced by Jawaharlal Nehru in front of the Constituent Assembly. So, this is what you need to know for prelims. Now, from a mains perspective, let's analyze the Objective Resolution critically. Let's see what Dr. Ambedkar had to say about the Objective Resolution. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the architect, the father of the Indian Constitution, right, the chairman of the Constituent Assembly. What did Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had to say about the Objective Resolution? Dr. Ambedkar praised the Objective Resolution for being a pragmatic document that accounted for India's societal realities. He praised the ideals and the values that were imbibed in the Objective Resolution, which became a guiding force for the preamble of the Constitution and the eventual Constitution itself. But however, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar identified two major flaws in the Objective Resolution. There can be a 10-mark question on this. The two major flaws in Objective Resolution is that, one, though it recognizes fundamental rights like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, right to equality, these basic rights are being recognized. It did not provide for remedies. Rights without remedies is almost useless. How will you enforce the rights and protect the rights if there are no remedies for the citizens to ensure their fundamental rights are protected? This is where the Constituent Assembly introduced Article 32 of the Indian Constitution that provides for those remedies. Now, this is a homework for you, a small assignment for you. Can you read about the remedies that are provided under Article 32? There are four provisions provided here, four remedies which are provided to protect your fundamental rights. A citizen can directly approach the Supreme Court in order to secure and protect their fundamental rights. Even non-citizens, when they enjoy certain fundamental rights, which is accorded to them under the Constitution, right? They can approach the Supreme Court to protect their constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights. So this is a remedy. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction here when it comes to protection of fundamental rights. So those remedies are provided under Article 32. The flaw in the Objective Resolution was there were no remedies considered for the rights. But through Article 32, remedies were provided to enforce and protect those fundamental rights. The second flaw of Objective Resolution is that it does not include a socio-economic framework. Though it talks about equality, it does not provide how to achieve equality. How will you achieve the social divide which is there? How will you bridge that social divide? The economic differences, how will you bridge those economic differences? That framework, the socio-economic framework, was missing in the Objective Resolution. This was corrected by the Constituent Assembly by adding Part 4 of the Indian Constitution, the DPSPs, the Directive Principles of State Policy, which is a set of directives for the state to focus on socio-economic welfare. So this is one important analysis that you need to be aware of. Dr. Ambedkar was critical of the Objective Resolution, though he considered it to be a pragmatic document. He cherished the ideals and values of the Objective Resolution, but he identified two flaws. Rights without remedies, no socio-economic framework to achieve equality. And this was corrected through Article 32 and DPSPs respectively. Now moving to the prelim section of today's analysis, let's take a quick look and wrap up the discussion after that. On page 12, there's an article that refers to the Green Climate Fund as COP30 negotiations are taking place in Belém. It's being hosted by Brazil. India, which is one of the key participants, has worked with other developing, underdeveloped nations to come out with a new platform, a new country-specific platform to ensure that the finances that are committed under the Green Climate Fund is dispersed to the concerned countries. So, first, you need to understand what is this Green Climate Fund. See, under the Paris Agreement, we have Article 9.1. According to this provision of Paris Agreement, developed countries are given an obligation. Developed nations have to arrange finance for helping developing underdeveloped countries to deal with adaptation and mitigation measures. This is based on the CBDR principle of Kyoto Protocol, the common but differentiated responsibilities. That the developed industrialized countries which are responsible for historical emissions, they will pool their money and create a fund, a common fund, through which they will channel finances towards the global south to assist in their adaptation measures and mitigation measures. So this led to the birth of Green Climate Fund. Now, can you tell me in which COP was the Green Climate Fund established? That's another small homework for you. So this has been set up under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Green Climate Fund today has a pool of $19 billion. The structure is headquartered in Songdo, South Korea, and it is administered through the Climate Change Convention. But however, the funds are not adequately disbursed to the target countries. Hardly 25% of these funds have been distributed. For example, India has received a few $1 million, though we should have received more than $1 billion by now. So there is a clear mismatch between what has been committed to the Green Climate Fund by developed countries and what has been dispersed to the developing underdeveloped nations. So to ensure better dispersal of the funds, a new country-specific platform is being created. So this initiative is being made possible through the collaboration of developing underdeveloped countries led by India. India is working with the African Islands Climate Commission, the Small Island States Climate Commission of the African countries, and other developing underdeveloped countries like South Africa, Cambodia, Kazakhstan, Colombia. We are working with these nations together to provide for a new country specific platform for dispersal of funds for adaptation measures and mitigation measures that are committed under the Green Climate Fund. So, this is a development from COP30 at Belém in Brazil. Next, China has breached the territorial sovereignty of Japan in a major escalation in the East China Sea. The China Japan have a standing maritime and territorial dispute in the East China Sea. So here you have a small island, a strategic archipelago of islands located here. So in Japan, it is referred to as Senkaku. Japan has control over the Senkaku Islands. It is administered by Japan. Japan has sovereignty over Senkaku Islands, but China disputes this. China claims Japan has no sovereignty over Senkaku, and in China, these islands are referred to as the Diaoyu. So the Senkaku Diaoyu Island dispute is a long-standing dispute between the two countries. And now the Chinese Coast Guard has violated international law and breached Japan's territorial sovereignty because Chinese Coast Guard ships have entered the territorial waters of Japan at Senkaku Islands. See, according to UN clause, according to UN Convention on Law of the Sea, which defines your maritime boundaries, territorial waters extend up to 12 nautical miles from the baseline of a coastal state. So up to 12 nautical miles from your baseline, that is your territorial waters, where a country has complete sovereign rights. It's as good as the territory of that country, which means there is no freedom of navigation in territorial waters. A country can block the entry of foreign ships and vessels. And unless and until a foreign vessel can prove that it's an innocent passage, right? They can't be allowed to enter into territorial waters of another country. So China's Coast Guard vessels have breached Japan's territorial waters and carried out a passage through the territorial waters of Japan. And this is a blatant violation of UN clause provisions. So this could easily escalate further. So Taiwan is closely watching these developments because Senkaku Diaoyu is quite close to Taiwan as well. And as you know, China has been claiming Taiwan as part of its sovereignty, and it even has a plan to eventually occupy Taiwan and bring a full merger of Taiwan with the rest of China. So, Taiwan's military and defense forces have been tracking these Chinese Coast Guard vessels in coordination with Japan. And they have reported this major breach where Chinese defense vessels from the Coast Guard have entered the territorial waters of Japan at Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. The next article related to the Delhi Red Fort blast. See, following the bomb blast, initial reports indicated that the explosive that was used could most likely be ammonium nitrate, which is a very common fertilizer, blended with fuel oil and other chemical reagents. This was the initial suspicion. But something was not right about this initial suspicion. The nature of the fire, if you've seen the visuals, right, and the very nature of the explosion that happened near Red Fort, indicated that something is different about the explosive that might have been used. So now a new suspicion has propped up for the investigating agencies, and sources are reporting that most likely the explosive used in the blast was not just ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, but they might have used something known as the mother of Satan. The name sounds very scary, right? Mother of Satan. So, what is this mother of Satan? What type of explosive is it? Where does this get the name from? Mother of Satan is a reference to a combination explosive, triacetone triperoxide, TATP, is the actual chemical ingredient. It is manufactured using acetone and hydrogen peroxide with a chemical catalyst. Now, the problem is TATP is an extremely volatile and explosive chemical substance. It has been extensively used by terrorist organizations such as Islamic State and Al Qaeda, and they have given it the name, the nickname, Mother of Satan, because it's very volatile. Even at slight friction or even exposed when to a slight heat source, TATP can catch fire and explode violently, triggering a massive explosion and a fire. So this is what has led Indian investigators to believe that probably mother of Satan or triacetone triperoxide might have been used in combination with ammonium nitrate fuel oil and other chemical reagents to trigger the blast at Red Fort. Is that clear? So this can be easily synthesized using ordinary chemicals that are commercially available. Just like how ammonium nitrate is freely available as a fertilizer and then can be turned into an explosive. Similarly, TATP is very easy to synthesize. Acetone is found in nail polish remover, right? Acetone is widely available, used across industries. Same with hydrogen peroxide. You find it in hair bleach, disinfectants, etc. So by accessing these commercially available chemicals, you can synthesize them with a acid catalyst like sulfuric acid to produce triacetone triperoxide, and it can evade metal detectors and your traditional explosive scanners because it is free from nitrogen. Your traditional explosive scanners, they are trained to detect nitrogen traces, right? But TATP can evade most of the scanners because it is nitrogen free and it is extremely volatile. Even with slight friction, slight heat, it can catch fire and explode violently. That's why it's called Mother of Satan. Is that clear? In fact, many times those who are assembling this bomb, they get killed because it is so volatile. Even before terrorists of Al Qaeda, ISIS have moved the bomb to the target location, bombs have exploded because TATP is extremely volatile explosive. That's why it's nicknamed Mother of Satan. Coming to the last article for today, the Indian Army is taking a major step towards the Northeast region, towards the strategic Siliguri corridor. As you know, the Siliguri corridor of India is a narrow land corridor linking Northeast India with the rest of the country. It's also referred to as the chicken's neck because it's a very slender and long corridor, hardly 22 kilometers wide, and surrounded by two international borders, Nepal on one side and Bangladesh on the other side. India has always feared a possible blockade at Siliguri, which could cut off Northeast India from rest of the country. So, given the rising threat profile at Siliguri corridor, India is stepping up its defensive preparedness. See, right now we have a hostile regime in Bangladesh under Muhammad Yunus. We have seen a rise of radical forces. We have seen Bangladesh colluding with China. And reportedly, Bangladesh has brought China to revive the Lal Monirhat Air Base, which is very close to India's Siliguri corridor. Then, parallelly, Bangladesh is building closer ties with Pakistan. We have seen how Pakistani military leaders have been visiting Bangladesh, how known radical and extremist leaders from Pakistan have been visiting Bangladesh as well to instigate more recruitment. Bangladesh has been a terror proxy in the past. Pakistan's ISI has used Bangladesh as a launch pad to not just fund Northeast extremists like Naga insurgents or Bodo insurgents, but even terror groups like Lashkar, Al Qaeda, and branches of Jaish e Mohammed have found presence and support in Bangladesh. Recently, we have seen Pakistani naval ships docking at Chittagong port or the Chittagong port, which is the first time since 1971 war. So Pakistan-Bangladesh relations are improving, their defense ties are improving. So the very development poses a threat for India. Recently, China hosted a trilateral meeting in Kunming in the Yunnan province that borders India's Arunachal Pradesh by inviting officials from Pakistan and Bangladesh to discuss regional initiatives. So India is presuming that these developments could be a serious challenge, and hence we are gearing up our military preparedness. Because see, China already has a significant military presence at the Chumbi Valley between Sikkim and Bhutan near the Doklam Plateau. From here, Siliguri is easily accessible. And Pakistan has used Nepal and Bangladesh for covert activities for infiltration of terrorists. Bangladesh has been a security challenge for India in the past. So, given these threats, India is stepping up its military preparedness. The Indian Army has set up 3 new garrisons very close to Siliguri corridor to step up surveillance. So, one in Assam, in the Dhubri district, then one in Kishanganj in Bihar, which is very close to Siliguri, and the other in Chopra in West Bengal. So, in these 3 states, in Assam, Bihar, and West Bengal, Indian Army has set up 3 new garrisons. This complements the other mobilization India has been carrying out. For example, the Sukhoi 30 fighter jets and Rafale fighter jets have been moved to frontline air bases like Hashimpura. Then BrahMos and S-400 batteries have been deployed in the northeast. Indian Army has raised a dedicated mountain warfare division. So all the 3 armed forces are really stepping up their presence across this region, mainly to secure India's weak point, the vulnerability at Siliguri corridor. Recently, a tri-service exercise was conducted, exercise Purvi Prachand Prahar, which even included the special forces. This exercise was conducted in Arunachal Pradesh, very close to the border with China. So this exercise was sending a message to China, right? So Indian Army, Indian Air Force, then even naval assets, including special forces like Marcos, were involved in this large-scale exercise called Purvi Prachand Prahar. So this clearly indicates India's growing military presence in the region, and it shows that India is gearing up to deal with any potential threat. So on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the key topics. And if you benefited from the session, please comment below, press the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.